Hello, and welcome to this edition of Google Hangouts, brought to you by the National Crowdfunding Association of Canada. The NCFA is Canada's leading advocate for crowdfunding and is an essential resource for education and networking related to crowdfunding. The NCFA works closely with industry groups, government, academia, and other business affiliates to create a strong and dynamic crowdfunding industry and voice across Canada. In today's hangout or discussion, the topic is centered around virtual currency, specifically Bitcoin, and its potential to coexist with crowdfunding portals and business pursuing crowdfunding campaigns. Our guests are Alastair Mitchell, who is the president of Resilient21, a Bitcoin professional service provider, and Albert Lin, an associate at McCarthy Tétrault. I will be moderating this discussion. My name is Gabe Nasser. I am a marketing intern here at the NCFA for the summer. I'm from Silicon Valley of California and currently studying at UC Berkeley. So why don't we start with a little introduction. We'll start with you, Alastair.
My name's Alastair Mitchell. Like Gabe said, I'm from the Resilient21 group. We're a Bitcoin professional services firm, so we manage Bitcoin ATMs, a merchant point-of-sale application so they can accept Bitcoins, as well as consult a wide variety of businesses on Bitcoin.
Great. And then we have Albert Lin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Albert Lin. I recently joined McCarthy Tétrault as an associate in the Real Property and Planning group. I was recently called to the bar in June of 2014, and prior to law school, I wrote a couple peer-reviewed journal articles in the area of biotechnology, and I worked at a private equity firm in Chicago. And thank you for having me.
It's good to have both of you. Excited to get some cool info out of this. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Alastair, we'll start with you. What we want to get is some information about how Bitcoin and crowdfunding relate to each other, or how they can, commingle, and if there's, any challenges that Bitcoin faces, and if these two technologies, if it's a good time for them to be merging, or what the future holds. So, Alastair, I'll point it to you.
So with Bitcoin at its most basic level, it can be used as a payment system and a currency. At the very beginning, it's a very good fit for crowdfunding platforms as a payment system, just because of all the fees you would save. For instance, if you're looking to raise money on various platforms, they usually charge a 2 or 3% premium in order to pay for the Visa or PayPal cost involved in handling that money. But since Bitcoin removes the financial intermediary from the process, the crowdfunding platform, and therefore the businesses raising money, will save that 2 or 3% right there. So right at the very basic level, it's fantastic for all platforms to accept Bitcoins just because of cost savings. At a higher level as a currency, right now, it's not ideal just because of the price fluctuation. For instance, the price can go up and down 5 to 10% per day, which is not ideal for a business, obviously, because they want to know their cost. What they can do with the payment processors is convert it right to cash at the time they raise the money. So if I donate $20 worth of Bitcoins to a crowdfunding business, they will receive $20 in their merchant account. So they get the money directly. Also, long-term with the currency, once it does stabilize, that means they'll be able to keep the Bitcoins right in Bitcoins and more easily transact with other companies around the world in their supply chain. So say company A is crowdfunding, but they need to buy parts for their equipment or whatnot from a country overseas with a different currency. Now, they don't have to go through a second financial intermediary to send them that money. They can just send them Bitcoins and save fees in that process. But that will only really happen once the price stabilizes.
So if I could ask a quick question, just
Sure.
to Bitcoin, now the standard process, is it to be converted to a more standard currency right now? And if so, would there be fees for that conversion?
I'd say yes, it is a standard procedure right now, just because of, like we talked about, businesses need to know their cost. So whether it's a crowdfunding platform or a restaurant, they want that $20 in cash because that's how much the product essentially costs them, whether it's a restaurant or a merchant. And there are fees depending on the platform you use. I know the major one is probably BitPay in the US, and depending on the plan that you have with them, they'll charge 1% or a variation depending if you have a monthly plan. And I'm sure they do custom plans for larger organizations such as a crowdfunding platform. In Canada, the largest one right now would be on the back end would be CA Vertex, and they charge 0.75% right now, but I know they're coming out with 0% for merchants to help spur adoption. So there are costs involved. If you keep it in Bitcoin though, it stays at 0%. It's just Bitcoin to Bitcoin.
So I'm going to switch gears to Albert. I want to just see, Albert, what do you foresee with Bitcoin and crowdfunding? What is your impression of both of these things, and is there a place for them to coexist?
So first off, I want to say that all the points that Alastair made are very good points, and I think they're spot on. And then going back to some of the potential benefits of using a virtual currency such as Bitcoins in the crowdfunding platform, is that in addition to what Alastair has mentioned, such as reduced transaction costs, increased access to untapped markets of funds, and the efficiency of the transfers. One other potential benefit of people who are looking for funding on crowdfunding platform to accepting Bitcoins is that there could be a benefit from the marketing perspective. Specifically, I think that a service provider or a fund seeker who is willing to accept Bitcoin may be viewed as an early technology adopter, and it may be perceived as more innovative. And so from a marketing perspective, it may be have some goodwill and some potential benefit there. And then on the flip side, some of the risks involved in as we have seen in the early adoption of Bitcoin in commercial transactions is first off, like Alastair has mentioned, the volatility of the currency itself. And so the volatility of the currency itself is a function of some of the recent world events, such as when Mt. Gox unfortunately just imploded, and which may be a result of this being an early stage of development. There is really not a lot of clarity as to how best to go about regulating the industry. And then, and also, this contributes to perhaps a lack of consumer or investor confidence, and which in turn contributes to perhaps a lack of depth in the market. There's not enough transaction volume to really have a real-time good valuation of the currency. And then, second point, with respect to some of the drawbacks of Bitcoin as a currency, as Alastair has alluded to, is that from the regulatory perspective, particularly from an income tax perspective, from the view of CRA, with respect to the Income Tax Act, virtual currencies are not considered currencies, rather they're considered as a commodity. And so, as Alastair has alluded to, right now the standard process is to convert virtual currencies such as Bitcoins back into what we call perhaps like fiat or paper money. And that process can actually potentially incur significant income or capital tax liabilities as applicable. And so that's the second point. And then a third point is that there is also issues with respect to compliance with the money laundering and anti-terrorism regulations. And so as recent as June 19th, so I think that was last Thursday, the Bill C-31 was recently just received royal assent. And then what the bill contemplates is that dealers of virtual currencies who are in the business of dealing in virtual currencies, they would need to register with the organization FinTrack as a money service business. And with that comes with the responsibility of applying all sorts of regulatory oversight and reporting regimes to their business. And so currently, although the act is assented, it is not yet in force, and there are regulations with respect to the specifics as to what business activities would be, and it would encompass, quote unquote, dealing with virtual currencies. And so right now, there's not a lot of clarity as to who would potentially and what business activities would attract additional compliance requirements. And so those are some of the challenges and some of the benefits. And with respect to, I think, the future of, the crowdfunding platform and virtual currencies, I do think there is significant opportunity there for convergence of these two spaces, and also an opportunity for co-development. And insofar as virtual currencies become larger and larger percentage of the deal flow going through crowdfunding platforms, stakeholders in crowdfunding platforms would be well benefited from contributing to the public education or the policy making with respect to the regulation of virtual currencies, and vice versa. And so I think there is a great opportunity there for synergy and convergence.
Thank you, Albert. That was very informative. You really did your homework on this. Thank you. Alastair, I want to maybe direct some of the comments that he made to you. What do you think about this notion that virtual currencies aren't recognized as a currency, and if it's really just a labeling issue, and if so, how can that be worked out?
Well, right now, as he alluded to, it's not considered a currency. So when you essentially make a transaction using Bitcoin, I believe barter rules apply. So you have to, from a tax perspective, account for what you paid for that Bitcoin and what essentially it was transacted at. So if I bought a Bitcoin for $10 and I invested it for $30 in the startup through crowdfunding, then essentially I have to pay the $20 capital gains. That's in theory. I'm sure there's some technical details behind that where if you're buying crowdfunding, it might not be considered the same thing, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I'm sure as more and more people do use Bitcoins, and obviously the policies will evolve to meet the needs. But it is important for the government to not stifle innovation by making too many rules around Bitcoins and how they are used. Because as we've seen, Bitcoins don't fall into any easily defined category. Are they a commodity? Are they a currency? Are they a payment system? So there's no existing rules that really fit Bitcoin as a whole. And of course, each different part of the government will look at a different way to suit their own, come from their own angle. For example, the CRA will look at it from a taxable perspective, whereas different organizations like FinTrack will look at it from a money laundering angle, and they'll each put their own rules in place. So a holistic view is very important from the government's angle to make sure everybody gets what they need out of the Bitcoin rules and regulation. And to touch on the legal legislation, I think it was Bill 31, that, in my opinion, will only apply to people transacting between dollars and Bitcoins. So it won't be the crowdfunding platform per se, but it will be the payment processor. So the CA Vertex or BitPay will be required to follow those rules and regulations.
Okay, great. Yeah. One of the words Albert used was a co-development between the two, virtual currencies and crowdfunding. I think this is really interesting because the two technologies of virtual currency and crowdfunding are so nascent and emerging that each can help boost the other to prominence. And how do you think this can be traced out?
There's certain technology you can build on top of the Bitcoin protocol. So, like I've said, Bitcoin's a currency and a commodity and a payment system, but it's also a public ledger that can store information. So there's a lot of opportunity there for crowdfunding platforms to use the blockchain to store and share information, whether it's who owns what part of what deal, public notes on the company that are available to everyone anywhere, public disclosure of other information. There's a whole bunch of different information that can be added to the blockchain to help make it transparent so the government may get what they want from both the Bitcoin protocol and the crowdfunding platform at the same time. So it's a sharing of information and becoming more transparent with that information. And that transparency also benefits potential and current investors or fundraisers on the platform.
Right. Okay, great. I do have one more question for you, Alastair. Hopefully you can answer this for me. It does relate, I think, a bit, but it changes gears a little bit too. The trackability, if that's the right word, the trackability of Bitcoin or virtual currencies. I think part of their benefits, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're intraceable, sort of like having cash online, right? Does this pose any problems for crowdfunding? Because it's like, you know, how do I know that, you know, my X amount of dollars or Bitcoin, X amount of Bitcoins is going to be used in the way that I wanted it to when it's not really traceable?
That's true and false. Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol, is pseudo-anonymous. So you see every single Bitcoin transaction that has ever occurred, it's on the blockchain, and anybody can view this information, whether it's a crowdfunding platform or the government or individuals. Where it becomes a bit anonymous is because those addresses are just alphanumeric characters at this point. So unless you publicly identify yourself with an address, nobody knows who owns that address and the Bitcoin, you know, who control the flow of Bitcoins in and out of that particular address. But it does lead to where a crowdfunding platform can say publicly, here's my address so everybody can see it, and then all the money gets put together in one common pot, which is an address, and then if they want to be completely public, they can say we're sending this much money to this company based on X, this much money to this company based on Y. So it allows your books essentially be open. Now, a lot of companies may not want that, obviously, for competitive reasons, and just it's a lot of, you know, tracking of information. But it is there, and it is a feature that can be made available. That feature, I believe, lends itself a lot more to charities and companies raising money for charitable pursuits, because you can ensure the money that you're donating goes directly to the source, which is the end cause at the end of the line. So you can see that the money did get to that charity, in fact, and it's not being moved in a different direction.
Cool. Okay, good stuff. Albert, anything you want to add to that or ask?
I think with respect to one thing that I'll be interested to hear Alastair's view on this is that some of the factors that affects Bitcoin's purchasing power. And so the way I understand it, you know, recently there's been a lot of volatility in Bitcoin with respect, you know, as consequences of recent world events, and also it likely is a factor of the acceptability, so the proportion of service providers and product providers that are willing to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. And so, what are your thoughts on going forward? Has there been studies that really kind of quantitates, it gives us an idea of kind of like the rise in the purchasing power, and then not just so much as an output of like 1 Bitcoin equals X Canadian dollars, but in reality, when you filter it through, again, through whether service providers are willing to accept it, what is the real world purchasing power that a Bitcoin holds?
Well, the exchange rate, like as you know, is very volatile. And merchants right now, they don't keep a majority of their transactions in Bitcoins. Once they offer up an invoice to a customer, the customer pays in Bitcoins. Those Bitcoins are 99% of the time converted right to cash at the time of the transaction based on the current exchange rate. So that's how they hedge the volatility. Long term, as the price becomes more stable though, that's an ideal situation for Bitcoin. A stable price, it can be used just like the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar. So once customers or businesses receive those funds, they can, again, save on those small transaction fees that are currently required to convert the cash, keep it in Bitcoin, and then continue their business in Bitcoin. So they can pay their employees, they can purchase supplies, send money overseas, all in Bitcoin. So that's the ideal case long term.
And one other question, if I may, is recently we heard a lot about, and I think this is just hopefully an anomaly and more so an exception than the rule, but we do hear stories about problems with withdrawal requests and then the processing it takes to complete a withdrawal or a conversion from Bitcoin to dollars. Is that an issue in Canada?
I haven't heard any cases of issues with the payment processors delaying payment. Just like with the regular banking system, if you have, like once it gets converted to cash, which is right away, you still have to withdraw it from your merchant account to your business bank account. But that's common with credit card and PayPal now, and that takes 2 or 3 business days. And then that just highlights the huge benefit of Bitcoin. Sending money with Bitcoin, it can happen instantly in a matter of minutes, whereas 2 or 3 days to get your money out does slow down how fast you can do business.
Great.
All right. So I think we got a good conversation here. Is there any final notes that you guys want to make, just for the sake of brevity? I think we should wrap it up here. Anything else you guys want to quickly add in?
Just on usability, and I think this is important for Bitcoin long term. Right now, I've never heard a good reason from a merchant why they should not accept Bitcoins, whether it's a crowdfunding platform or a restaurant. On the flip side of the coin, there's not enough people, I believe, right now using Bitcoins. So a lot of people have Bitcoins, but they're early adopters or people in the technical field who are comfortable using Bitcoins in its current format. What needs to happen long term is people receive Bitcoins as part of their salary or find different ways to acquire Bitcoins through their day-to-day lives. And also to make doing so very user-friendly. We need the Netscape moment, if you will, where it makes the internet easy to use for everybody as opposed to just the technically inclined. So we need to get more Bitcoins in the hands of the average person.
Great example. Yes, I'm from Silicon Valley, so I know exactly what you're talking about. All right, Albert, any final thoughts?
No, I want to thank Alastair for all his input, and thank you, Gabe, for inviting me.
Yes, and thank you both for joining me. This was a lot of fun, and Alastair, I wish you luck with Resilient 21. It's all very exciting. It's all very fresh, and it's got that fresh smell. So good luck with everything.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation, brought to you by the NCFA, and I hope you continue to follow us as we look forward to providing you with more valuable crowdfunding content and resources.